Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the second episode of the Muslim Bitcoiner podcast. I'm your host, Abdullah, and today we have a very special guest. We have Sheikh Muawiyyah Tucker. Muawiyyah Tucker is a graduate from Medina University and is an Islamic scholar and Quran teacher. He runs the website cryptohashreview.com, where he educates Muslims on cryptocurrencies and more specifically Bitcoin. He is perhaps the only Islamic scholar on the web that is actively advocating for Muslims to adopt the Bitcoin standard. He has put out numerous YouTube videos addressing criticism from both Muslim scholars against Bitcoin, and he has made other content about Bitcoin fundamentals and other topics like fiat, Riba, and other finance topics. Muawiyyah Tucker, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. We're happy to
Yeah,
be on the show.
yeah, alhamdulillah. So I guess the first question I want to ask you, and I've heard the answer to this on some of your other shows, but I would also like to hear it on here too, is could you tell us a little bit about how you got into Bitcoin? Like what's your story on how you got into it?
Well, بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. ما بعد. So I mean, with regards to Bitcoin, I guess the beginnings of Bitcoin for me is a bit ambiguous. The only reason I say that is because in my mind for many years, my story began with I guess July time of 2017 when I was updating my website to allow for people to sign up to our courses, Arabic and Quran courses online. I wanted to have um, I wanted to increase the opportunities and avenues for payment. So we had integrated PayPal, and I think there was some issues with PayPal, as in there was I think there was some registration issues, and it frustrated me. And I figured, let me use that Bitcoin thing. I heard there's Bitcoin, you can just take money directly. So I had heard about it, but I had not done anything about it. So for me, it was about getting uh, uh, a means to receive payment without a middleman. So I looked into it. I found a WordPress plugin that allowed you to receive payments. I integrated it into my website. I went to Coinbase, I signed up. I purchased about £50 worth of Bitcoin, and I did so that I can test if the website actually works. So I signed up to one of my own courses. I paid for it, and I was like, yay! I just paid for some Bitcoin on my course. And then I think about a month or two later, when I looked at the balance of the money I just bought, it had gone up, and I'm like, well, what's going on here? And then that's when I guess the rabbit hole began. So I thought that was the beginnings of Bitcoin for me. Ironically, I think recently I was going through all my photos and videos on my phone, trying to delete old videos and photos I don't need, and I found a screen recording I had done of Jazeera. So the news outlet called Al Jazeera, and I
Hmm.
had recorded their short presentation about Bitcoin in 2016. So I was surprised to see that I had already had exposure to Bitcoin in 2016, but obviously I hadn't acted upon it. I just probably recorded it, was interested in it, but didn't do anything about it. So yeah, so I guess 2017-16 was the beginnings. But I guess for everyone, it's always the case. You kind of hear about it, you don't really pay much attention to it, and then later on, something causes you to move in that direction. And then
Were you concerned at all about like the price of Bitcoin when you started accepting it as a payment, or were you just like, all right, let's just use this?
I don't think I don't think that the whole price of it going up and down was something I was really privy to at the time,
Wow.
because from the very beginning, I distinctly remember in 2011 and 12. I was hit by the gold with gold fever.
Hmm.
And I distinctly remember going on a rampage telling everyone, gold is the standard. We should just go with 10 out to gold, and I think that was a thing at the time because the price of gold had gone up, the
Hmm.
interest in gold had increased. So I guess when interest of gold on anything increases, people, they tell their friends, and their friends tell their friends, and then I guess everyone finds a narrative which justifies why they should be in gold. And I think at the time, so that kind of opened me up to the whole sound money kind of thinking and whatnot. And I guess as a Muslim, we already kind of have that anyway.
Hmm.
Muslims, you'd find, generally speaking, already gravitate towards a gold standard because of the whole dinar and dirham, and it's inside the Quran, it's inside the Sunnah. We already have that in our minds anyway.
Right.
So, and if you also factor in, which was the case for me, this current system of interest, gold seems to be, at least in the mind, an
Hmm.
alternative or means to escape the current system of interest and banking and all the rest of it. So that was the narrative then anyway. So I guess
Right.
when Bitcoin came along, it was just another avenue, another means to escape that system, if you were saying. So the price action was never an issue for me until August 2017, when I'd noticed that the Bitcoin I had purchased had gone up, and then I was wondering why had it gone up, and then everything began at that moment.
Wow. So I wanted to ask you, when you started to learn about Bitcoin and get into it, was it immediately obvious that Bitcoin would be a way to escape riba, or was that not like immediately obvious to you when you first got into Bitcoin?
I mean, it was immediately obvious that Bitcoin was something which was not controlled by the government. So,
Hmm.
so I guess from that part of the narrative, that was already appealing, because as I mentioned, I already had an inkling
Hmm.
or a direction of wanting money that is not controlled by the state,
I
wanting
see.
money that is independent from human manipulation, quote unquote. So I guess that's why you'd find certain people who are used to be into gold or gold bugs. At some point, maybe they realized that Bitcoin is just a better alternative. I think they even Safer Dean. I think that's where he said he began. He began in that too, as well as a gold bug, and then he discovered Bitcoin. And then I think that's what happens when you discover Bitcoin and you
Hmm.
discover what Bitcoin can do. You find in Bitcoin the properties that drew you to gold in the first place, and then you find in Bitcoin, that is free from the failings that comes with gold. You kind of see what is parallel, which gets you interested, and you see how it's superior, which gets you converted. If that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah,
That's probably the best way
absolutely.
to put it.
Definitely. Like as you learn more about Bitcoin, you realize like that's kind of what got me started to learn more about our current financial system. Like I wouldn't have learned or cared about learning about our current monetary system unless I started learning
Yeah,
about Bitcoin first. But yeah, the reason
yeah.
why I was asking about that question about Riba is that, when I first started learning about Bitcoin, it wasn't immediately obvious as a way to escape Riba. I was just like, oh, okay, this is like a money that I could use that's, I don't have to worry about it being debased or being have it worry about it being controlled by governments. Um, how,
Mhm.
how would you explain to a Muslim that Bitcoin is necessary if you're looking to escape riba? Like, how would you explain that to a Muslim?
Well, I mean, from the very beginning, I do remember distinctly that one of the reasons why I wanted to integrate Bitcoin payments into my website at the very beginning, and again, this was before the whole issue of price action and Bitcoin price going up. There was a strong narrative I had of taking my money out of the system, out of banking. Now, truth be told, I'm sure you can agree that I'm sure you've gone through the similar experience yourself. I wasn't really aware of how deep the rabbit hole went in terms of relates to the current Riba system. For me, in my mind,
Hmm.
if my money's in the bank is using that to give out loans. I actually know how the bank system works, how they could even give out loans even without your money, and, and how money is created through loans. All of the intricate details of Bitcoin and also of fiat. Sorry, I had no knowledge of it. All I had was surface knowledge that if my money's in the bank, they are using that money to give out loans and mortgages, and for that reason, I wanted my money out of the system. So if I could find a way to store my money, and even use my money without having to be in a bank account, that's what drew me to Bitcoin in the beginning. So it wasn't like saying, oh well, because my money is no longer in fiat, I'm no longer in the banking system. It was more that now my fiat money is no longer in the bank. So does that make sense? As in, there's a
Yeah.
slight nuance difference.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, absolutely. And I think, I was, shocked and horrified to find out that, like, a lot of people think, or especially a lot of Muslims think, that if you just like park your cash in a checking account, then you're safe. Like, the bank
yeah,
isn't going to
yeah,
be doing
yeah,
anything nefarious with it. But it turns out that, like,
yeah, yeah,
any kind of banking transaction you do with the dollar is definitely going to have riba tied to it. So yeah, I mean, that's
yeah,
as I've
yeah.
been learning more about Bitcoin, I've been able to kind of piece that together and realize that, like, hey, Bitcoin is actually, like, it's a new foundation that we could, like, build on top of, where we don't have to build riba, like, on top of that.
I mean, what's unique about Bitcoin is that again when I first got some Bitcoin and I integrated the payment into my website, one of the things and concerns I had was I didn't actually know much about Bitcoin. I knew about it in principle, but I didn't know the details. So I agreed with the principal ideas behind Bitcoin, money that is not controlled by people and governments, and I knew the basic gist. But there's always the question, is there really someone working behind it? Are there any back doors or kind of code? So that kind of led me to want to learn more about it so that I can have that confidence that I'm not just buying some kind of scheme. That that ambiguity of Bitcoin that led me to sort of research about Bitcoin led me to learn not only about Bitcoin but about the current system. I think that's something that I think everyone who does go down the rabbit hole, that's actually what that's actually one of the benefits. Even if the price of Bitcoin remained the same, everyone can
Hmm.
agree that the benefit that Bitcoin brought to them is that it opened their eyes to what's actually happening around us. Like you said,
Right.
I would never have cared about fiat or looking at fiat or central banking or any of that stuff until I had to ask myself, what is Bitcoin? Because you have to answer the question. Okay, if Bitcoin is money,
Hmm.
then what is money? And when you start asking that question, okay, what is money? Okay, then what is fiat? How did that come about? And it's like a cascade effect. It's like a cascade. Once you ask the first question, that leads to the second question, which leads to the third and fourth of this question, and before you know it, your whole world is turned upside down. Wait, I've been lied to all this time, and I see why people draw the metaphor of the Matrix, because there are a lot of strong parallels between the what happened to Neo and what happens to everyone. Once you've taken the blue pill or red pill, I'm not sure which one it is, or in our case, the orange pill. Once you take that, then you do kind of realize, wait, what I've been living in isn't actually what I assumed it to be, and it's actually very different. And I think that's what kind of lets people, some of us, to become almost evangelical, almost because it's like, guys, wake up, open your eyes. Like, I mean, just look around. It's not what you say it is. It's not what you think it is. And that's why like people think, oh, you're just a fanatic, you're a freak, you're I don't know how people think of us, but it's because of this, you can almost say, awakening, that comes from those questions. And I think everyone, even especially those who are listening to this, even if you come out of this conversation not really interested in parking any of your capital in Bitcoin or not interested in Bitcoin at all, at the very least, you should open your eyes to what you actually are in. What our current system is, how it functions. So at least after that, you can say, okay, look, I have fiat, I have a bank account, I know how it works, and I'm happy with it. Do that. But at the moment, most people just don't know.
Right. Yeah. And I find that, I feel like I obsess more about learning about fiat than I do Bitcoin at times, just because I think, when I'm trying to, like, have a go at trying to orange pill a Muslim, uh, I'll typically start with talking about, like, how our current monetary system is set up, and trying to get the message out there that, like, hey, we're not supposed to be involved in riba in any shape or form, but our current monetary
Mhm.
system is ingrained in that. Like, that kind
Yeah.
of, I'm hoping. What do you think the approach should be? Do you think, when talking to a Muslim, do you think we should introduce Bitcoin first, or should we introduce the problem of fiat first?
That's a difficult one because I'm sure you know of the statement that you have to do your 1,000 hours, and that is
Mm-hmm.
very true. It's people sometimes I've even had conversations with people who seem to think that Bitcoin is so complicated, and because it's complicated, therefore it must not be true. And then it's as in why is it so complicated to understand? It's not that it's complicated to understand. It's just that money, I guess you say business, life, business cycle. It's not a simple subject. It's like saying, break down to us or to me how Sharia law works. Yeah, I mean, I could give you an overview, but there's a lot involved in the whole legal system of a religion when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
marriage, divorce, buying, selling. I mean, there's so many things that you can talk about. It does take a while to get an overall gist of the whole picture. And the same thing happens with Bitcoin. It seems like a simple thing, money. What people don't understand is that the topic of money itself, forget Bitcoin, but the topic of money itself is very complex. And the fiat is even more complex than that. I mean, if you think about it, commodity-based money is technically very simple. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, gold, it has value. I have it, and then I exchange it for something else, and we agree on a certain price. I mean, the the mechanism of gold and silver and commodity based money is fairly simple. Actually, look at fiat when it gets really complicated. So, and by proxy, if we're kind of measuring Bitcoin or comparing Bitcoin to fiat, the complexity comes from that, not from Bitcoin. Besides the technical mechanism of Bitcoin, I mean, you don't have to know about mining and hash rate and SHA-256 and all that. You don't have to know about that specifically. If you want to know and if you want to understand what's the difference between Bitcoin and fiat, I think the majority of the complexity comes from how fiat works. If you started explaining to someone how fiat works first, you do introduce to them a whole world of complexity. But
Right.
in saying that, it's also kind of hard to understand why you need Bitcoin without explaining fiat. But why you need it, you need to know about fiat. And when you know about fiat, then you kind of see, okay, wait, we really need Bitcoin. This is not something which is uh, just a nice to have kind of thing. It's something we need to have globally.
Yeah, and I think like when you're just explaining Bitcoin, it's obviously you can understand it at a technical level, but like you said, you also have to understand like why we would need it, and especially as a Muslim, why we would need a different monetary system that's not tied to riba.
I mean,
I
also, if
yeah.
it's just topic, just sorry to interrupt. Just a small issue about the issue of need. I think another challenge we have, I guess, as Bitcoiners, is that especially in the West, we don't. If you used to eliminate this discussion of riba in the first place, so we're not really saying or discussing um, how Bitcoin is an alternative to a riba-based system. We're not talking about riba or interest or any of that kind of stuff. We're not talking about that. We're just talking
Hmm.
about Bitcoin versus any old money. Technically speaking, in the West, people don't really need Bitcoin like that. That makes sense. As in, they get
Hmm.
paid in their wages in fiat. They use their wages to pay their bills in fiat. They might buy their iPhone or whatnot with fiat. Life for them technically moves as it's predicted to be, and there's no real dire need like that for fiat. I mean, and for Bitcoin.
Hmm.
I mean, what I mean by that
Hmm.
dire need, as in they're not living in Turkey where the money's being inflated at 70%. Um, so because of that, there's no actual push for people to learn about Bitcoin. They're quite happy just to continue what they're doing. And I guess the analogy will be like if someone's in jail in a prison, but in
Hmm.
the prison, they've got a large garden. They can go out when they want. They've got food comes in 3 times a day. They've got TV. They've got their families, friends, and family. Everything they would need is there, but they're in prison. So we say to them, "Come escape." I'm like, but why? Why did I
Hmm.
escape? Everything I need is here. Only when, for example, maybe one of the prison guards decides to abuse them and beat them and take away their privileges, then they start thinking about escaping. And I guess another analogy, a quick one, would be, I guess, is slavery. we actually see in history, like in America, there was a time when some slaves preferred to be slaves because the life outside of slavery was a whole lot different, a lot more difficult. And we can't say that didn't exist. There was definitely what they call the house nigger. that was the phrase. The house nigger, the guy who lived the good life. He wasn't in the field like everyone else. He was in the house. He had good food. He had a good place to stay. He wasn't treated as an equal to his masters, but he still had a good life. Why would you want to leave that and try and do it yourself? I mean, I'm happy where I am. So I guess that's a similar challenge we have with people, especially in the West, how to explain to them why they need something when what they currently are in is comfortable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think when you I've noticed that you've talked to other Islamic scholars about like trying to orange pill them. And it does seem like from a lot of scholars that they don't really understand, I guess, that sort of need, like why other people would need Bitcoin, because it could be that they're comfortable with in the current fiat system, or they get, they get paid by their government. Um, so first of all, I want to say thank you for putting out all of your videos on YouTube that address like every single point that's made by Islamic scholars against Bitcoin. I think that's such a great effort, and I recommend that to friends and family. What do you think is the biggest misconceptions that scholars have against Bitcoin? Is it from a lack of education about fiat, or is it a lack of education about Bitcoin, or is it a little bit of both?
I think one of the biggest, I won't say challenges, one of the biggest issues that they have actually stems from their understanding of fiat, not Bitcoin. There are
Hmm.
definitely misconceptions about Bitcoin and all the other stuff, blah blah blah. But I think a lot of these misconceptions are more excuses than misconceptions. Meaning, um, there's a old, I think there's a fable, of the fox who wanted to take the grapes that was on the vine, or whatever the case of it. So he tried to reach and get the grapes, and tried to reach and get the grapes, but he couldn't get the grapes. And eventually, when he gave up, he said they were probably sour anyway. So this claim that they're sour was more of a coping mechanism for not being able to, I guess, get it or have it. So,
Hmm.
for example, when it comes to the scholars, they have no need for Bitcoin. I mean, immediate need, I would say. They feel that the current system is not only valid but actually halal, and because and also and on top of that, some of them actually feel that anything that threatens a system is, you could say, a risk or harm. So because of that, they start listing off reasons why Bitcoin is haram. Whereas
Hmm.
I believe if they actually took the time to understand how the current system works, I believe that a lot of their excuses or reasons why Bitcoin is haram would sort itself out. So, for example, their claims that it's used for illicit activity. I mean, anyone who's looking at the situation honestly would acknowledge that so is fiat. As much
Hmm.
as you use Bitcoin for crime, you use fiat for crime. And that actually was said by Sheikh Abdurrahman al-Barraq. He said that he used to say that Bitcoin was haram, and he listed some reasons why he said that. And he said in his follow-up fatwa that upon contemplation, a lot of the excuses he mentioned about Bitcoin is also applicable to fiat. And therefore, if Bitcoin is haram due to that, then fiat will also be haram due to that. Meaning, you can't penalize Bitcoin, something that is also present in what we currently use. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
But that realization takes someone having to take a step back, analyze the situation unbiasedly, and then realize it. Whereas it's very easy just to throw shade against Bitcoin. Oh, it does this and it does that and blah blah blah. Okay, that's more of a dismissive excuse. That makes sense. It's more of a dismissive reasoning. I've only seen one scholar actually made a reason against Bitcoin that I would say was based on correct understanding. Meaning, he actually was against Bitcoin, and the reason why he said he was against Bitcoin demonstrated that he actually understood how the fiat system works and the banking system works, and how Bitcoin works, which is odd because that doesn't make sense. Are you saying that the Sheikh actually understood everything and still said it's haram? I said, yeah, I do. But let's analyze what he said. He said, and I quote, that Bitcoin, one of the reasons, he said, I don't feel that Bitcoin is haram due to issues of volatility and whatnot. It does have properties of being money, but it is haram because it harms the central banks. So you're laughing because you're like, how does that make sense, Sheikh? And I would agree that makes no sense. But from his perspective, and I'm just making an excuse here. I don't know what really is behind it, but I'm guessing from his perspective, he's looking at that we have nation states. They function on a central banking system, on a centrally planned system, whereby, according to their claims, they regulate the economy through central banks, through the increase and a decrease in interest rates and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And Bitcoin threatens the ability for governments to perform that task. So if he feels, I mean, if that's an opinion he holds, if he has an opinion that the role of government is to manipulate the price and value of currency for whatever benefit, then he is correct in saying that Bitcoin prevents that. But my counter argument is that's how it's always been. If you look at historically, especially from the text, the Quranic text, and the Hadith, you find that the role of government isn't supposed to manipulate prices of things. I mean, he feels he can, and there are many people who have that view. I've had debates with people who say that the role of the government. We had discussions about what the government should and shouldn't, what the government should be able to do and shouldn't be able to do. Mm-hmm. And from some people believe that the governments should have certain powers. From them is I use the word manipulation, but they can use the word control or whatever, or regulate, but have control over the monetary system. I can bring examples from the Hadith where the Messenger of Allah spoke against such a thing of price fixing and whatnot. But my point was, back to my point, was that that's the only example I come across, a reason that actually reflected reality. He understood how central banks work. He understood that Bitcoin takes away those powers. And due to that, he said it was haram. So if people understood, if someone understood that his reasoning, and they understood how central banks work, I think that'd be fair. That'd be a fair debate and a fair discussion. But that's not the majority of the excuses that I've mentioned. The excuses that I've mentioned about Bitcoin have been a lot of frivolous things. But that was the only one. The only excuse I can say it was semi-genuine. I disagree with it. Semi-genuine. All the others were like, it's volatile. Okay, well, currencies other than Bitcoin are volatile. Oh, there's gharar, there's deception. No, there isn't any deception, but they're looking at it from a perspective. I mean, I guess maybe we could segue into that. Maybe we're going to segue into what the specifically discuss what they say rather than.
No, I mean, I just wanted just like a general feel of like what you think is kind of like the biggest hurdle that Muslim scholars have at like trying to correctly, I guess, understand Bitcoin. I mean, for me personally, like anytime I see like a fatwa, or at least the ones that are translated to English, they always bring up this like, oh well, Bitcoin can't be money because it doesn't have intrinsic value. And that just like it's in like almost every fatwa I've seen. I swear I see that like phrase intrinsic value everywhere. And that's what made me kind of like actually investigate like what intrinsic value is. And but what would you say is like the big hurdle that's preventing Muslim scholars from actually understanding Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I guess extending what I said a minute ago about not understanding fiat. I think another big hurdle for many scholars who speak on this issue are the lack of understanding and thought about what I would call the badihiyat, as in things that are obvious. And this is what, again, that's one of the things that I think Bitcoin does for people. It makes you reconsider the obvious. Because like I said, we've grown up. We've always had fiat in our hands. We've always used fiat. We've always had the idea of getting a bank account. We've always had the idea of there are things that are just so accepted as being obvious and accepted that sometimes you need a push or a poke to start thinking. Wait, let me reconsider these assumed truths, and that's what Bitcoin does. But that's only if you take up the challenge. Only if you actually take up the poke. If you actually recognize, Bitcoin is poking you to look at the situation. Let me look. If you don't actually look at the situation and you just fall back on the assumed truths, then you come up with what we see. So again, let me give an example. This idea of intrinsic value. Again, we've existed in a system where we have, I guess you could say, commodity-based currencies, gold and silver and all the rest of it. So this discussion of intrinsic value comes into play. We get that. But we now live in a world which is digital. We have digital representations of things, and we have digital things that have value, which would and should lead scholars to now not rethink, but to expand their understanding of this digital realm. What does it really mean? What can we take, and how does this invention of the computer and the internet, for example, how does that reshape some of the things we see, interact with? How does it change certain things? For example, can I buy property in cyberspace? I know many scholars would laugh at you. So, what are you talking about buy property in cyberspace? How can you buy property that doesn't exist? But yeah, even you laugh. It's about how can you buy property that doesn't exist? It's not real. But that's the thing, Sheikh. We need to start thinking about what really is real when you have people, a large portion of mankind on planet Earth, live their lives in this world which you say is not real. So how real is it, or isn't it? Does it make sense? You can't be so dismissive to say that it's not tangible, it's not real, because you're not in that world. We now are moving towards a world where most of what we do is in this intangible world. A lot of our business, you actually do shopping in this intangible world. So we can't just say it's not real. We have to start thinking about what does it really mean. So this idea of intrinsic value is a classic one. I discussed this with a friend of mine just the other day. Actually, he was talking about gold and silver and the idea of value. I said, but what you have to understand is that value is not a property like length or weight, or the passing of time. It's a subjective thing. You kind of see this discussion or this understanding play out when people say things like, "Oh, this thing has no value." But what does that mean? What does it mean to say X, Y, and Z has no value? So that's an absolute statement, but value is subjective. How can you say that something has no value? All you can say is something has no value to me, or something has no value to a group of people. But you cannot say absolutely has no value. Maybe it has value to me, or maybe it has value to you. You can't say that something has absolutely no value. And that's the example of Bitcoin. When Satoshi Nakamoto launched the Bitcoin network and transferred the first 50 Bitcoin to Hal Finney, what was the value of Bitcoin then? I could easily say that Bitcoin. Sorry, that was a phone call coming through. Can I just take this phone call? I think. Can I take this phone call?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, we can take a break right here.
It's fine. So yeah, back to the issue of value. So what I was saying was if I said to you, so when Satoshi Nakamoto sent that Hal Finney that 50 Bitcoin, I'm pretty sure he sent that as a test transaction. As in, he just got this Bitcoin and just flung it across the network, and Hal Finney received it, and they was happy that it was all done. He never sent it as a transfer of value. He never meant to pay for anything. He was just testing the network, the network that he worked. So technically speaking, that was a transaction of something which was valueless. Does that make sense? it had no technical value to either Hal Finney or Satoshi Nakamoto, besides the idea that it might work. I mean, that makes sense. The value came later on, once people perceived what can be done with it, and once people perceived what it takes to get it. So the value in Bitcoin came as an emergent property over time through human interaction with it and human perception from it. Does that make sense? So to say that Bitcoin has no value, the most you could say is it has no value to you. But then one could also contest that, saying that, but that makes no sense, because if I was to give you one Bitcoin, you acknowledge, even if you don't like Bitcoin, even Peter Schiff, even Peter Schiff, if I gave him one Bitcoin, he knows the value of Bitcoin. He knows he can go up to the shop and buy things with it. It's something that has emerged from over time, through human consensus, through human agreement, through what we know it can achieve from it. It does something that is intrinsically within Bitcoin. And this is back to your question, where you mentioned the idea of intrinsic value. Same thing with gold. Gold only has value because we all know what can be done with gold. If it was possible, let's assume we live in a world like Star Trek, whereby you can press a button in the machine and you can replicate anything on demand. If you could do that with gold, you can just literally make gold appear out of thin air. Would gold still have value? Beyond just looking nice and as its jewelry, no one would spend any money buying gold if I can just make it in this machine. So therefore, has gold lost its value? Well, relatively speaking, yeah, it has. One hour I had a discussion with someone saying that no, gold in and of itself has value, regardless of what we think of it. And that's rubbish. If mankind all died of COVID, if mankind all died of COVID-19, and there's no more human beings left alive, would gold still have value? No, it wouldn't, because there's no one there to value it. Whereas the dimensions of gold, as in its width, its height, its weight, those are properties that exist regardless of human beings. But the value of gold depends on human beings. So this is what I'm saying, that the idea of intrinsic value or not intrinsic value. Again, this whole discussion, we all need to have this discussion, understand what value really means. Once we've had that discussion and understand what value really means and how value is increased and decreased, had or disappears, once you have that understanding, then I think it becomes easy to understand Bitcoin, because then we understand, okay, wait, if anything could have value, if we all value it, then that also would include Bitcoin. So then that whole discussion ends, I guess you could say. But again, we need to have that discussion. I think a lot of scholars don't have that discussion.
Yeah, exactly. I was talking to a brother the other day about, that same problem with like intrinsic value, and then they'll bring up like gold and silver that has intrinsic value, and then you have to kind of walk through those steps and explain like why it doesn't have intrinsic value, or like you shouldn't think of it as intrinsic value. And I think after getting that hurdle for me, then I could kind of like start explaining, okay, like if something like Bitcoin and gold and fiat can have value, like what gives those things value? And then that's when like I really love the article in the book, The Bullish Case for Bitcoin, because it just kind of lays out those properties, and you're like, all right, if you're going to have good money, it needs to have scarcity, verifiability, fungibility, censorship resistance, and all of that. And then it just kind of starts to click. Like I feel like I was finally successful in orange pilling somebody in real life, and they were like, okay, I want to read more about it. And I'm like, I have this book. It's called The Bitcoin Standard. Let me give it to you. So, yeah, I think that's definitely like one of the misconceptions I see that Muslims have when it comes to Bitcoin. One question I wanted to ask you is that, when it comes to adopting a Bitcoin standard in the Muslim world, do you think that's primarily going to come from like scholars waking up to it, or governments, or like the everyday Muslim? Like where do you think uh where do you think that's going to start from if the Muslim world, inshallah, adopts a Bitcoin standard?
It's hard to say, because, and I'll be honest, the there's a kind of double-edged sword of Bitcoin. So this people always often raise the issue of the volatility, the price going up, price going down, and blah blah blah. What people need to understand is that, again, value is something which is earned. That's probably the best way to describe it. Value is something which is earned. The problem with fiat is that it's kind of something which is dictated rather than earned. You kind of told what things are. It's not something that is earned. It's value, if that makes sense. So Bitcoin, at the very beginning, when Satoshi Nakamoto first sent 50 Bitcoin to Hal Finney, Bitcoin hadn't really earned anything in terms of value. It was just born. No one really knew if it was going to work. No one really knew if it was going to survive by the end of the week. It was like almost like a baby who just being born. No one has any idea that this child will grow up to be anything significant in the world. But as the years pass, as that child grows, passes exams, makes certain achievements, then when this child is now an adult and has built a business, built an empire, we can now see the value of that child to society, you could say, and to us as my son, as my daughter's husband. We can now see what he offers to us, and you can almost say that he has earned the value that we attribute to him. I will often say to people, you can't say, oh, why does the price of Bitcoin go up and go down? I said, well, what do you expect it to do? I mean, you can't expect Bitcoin to be born at a value and set at that value. And I think this also comes from the fallacy, which most people have, of stability in currency. There is no such thing as a stability in currency. Even the idea of a stable coin is a fallacy. I know people always talk about a stable coin, we need a stable coin, and Bitcoin's not stable. And I'm one of the few, I would probably say, because I don't see many people saying this, but I'm one of the few who don't actually believe that there's any such thing inherent in any kind of a property of stability. Because what people mean by a stable coin is a coin that has a pegged value to the dollar. They don't mean it's stable. I mean, if I was to say that the price of Bitcoin will remain stable to bread, this is make a thought experiment. If I was somehow able to peg the value of Bitcoin to bread, or the value of bread, or a value of a loaf of bread, I somehow was able to maintain that algorithmically, like Terra Luna, I was able to peg it to bread. No one will consider that to be a stable coin, because the price of bread itself goes up and down. As in right now, we've seen the price of wheat globally going up because of the war in Ukraine and the rest of it. So we already know that the price of wheat and the price of bread isn't stable. So if the price of things that we pay for is not stable, what does it even mean to have a stable coin? The only reason why people want a stable coin, all they really want to do is replicate the dollar system in Bitcoin. And as I always said to people, look, stop trying to replicate the old system in the new. Get beyond that. One Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. People say, oh, that's just a funny, a silly statement. No, it's not a silly statement. Bitcoin, it's a thinking of Bitcoin as itself. And the idea of value being pegged to something, is that the idea of stability, it doesn't exist, because the price of things goes up and down. So then why would you expect anything else to be that way? So back to the issue of the price of Bitcoin, it goes up, and it has to go up, because as the more people value it, the more the price will go up. And that in itself is kind of what draws a lot of people to Bitcoin, but it's also the distraction. This is the distraction. This is why I think it kind of helps in drawing people to be interested in Bitcoin, but also distracts people from understanding the true value of Bitcoin. It draws people to be interested in it, but at the same time, it kind of distracts people from actually understanding why it's actually valuable in the first place. Let me give one example. A friend of mine shared with me, actually, let me find what he said. He said, he was telling me about how a friend of his shared to him some coin called hyper fund, some Ponzi scheme. And he said to him, look, just stick to Bitcoin and forget all these other crap coins. And I said to him as a joke, I said, I bet you he was disappointed by that advice. And he laughed as he was. Because a lot of people who come to Bitcoin The only reason why they're here, at least initially, is to get more fiat. So they see Bitcoin as an investment opportunity. They have no idea that Bitcoin is actually a solution to their problem. So that's one of the problems that we have to deal with. So when it comes to the adoption of Bitcoin, Muslims or Muslim nations need to start seeing the virtue of Bitcoin besides its price action. Until that happens, I think adoption will kind of be haphazard, because what will happen is that if that's their premise, if their only reason for being involved in Bitcoin is the price action, that would mean that they're going to go to all the other crap coins out there. You're going to go to this coin, Hypercoin, and Hex, and Luna, and all these other Doge and Shiba Inu, and as one guy called me up, one brother actually paid for consultation to ask me about Wife Doge, a coin called Wife Doge, and I was like, what? Wallahi,
Wow.
I thought he was trolling me. I'm like, are you serious? And he actually showed me the website. He actually bought coins called Wife Doge, as in the wife of Doge.
That's embarrassing.
But the thing is, why do we always see this cycle of Muslims who get interested in Bitcoin, and the very next day they start buying a whole long list of these other coins? They are only interested in getting more fiat. They actually haven't understood why Bitcoin is important in the first place and why we need Bitcoin. If they understood all the properties that makes Bitcoin an amazing thing to have, then they would say, you know what, I don't need these other coins. I just need Bitcoin. But it's because they want more fiat why they get distracted. So the adoption, again, what I'm saying, the answer to your question is, we kind of see a double-edged sword. Price action of Bitcoin gets people interested in the space, but also distracts them away from Bitcoin to nonsense. Only once, and this is something I'm sure many people will can attest to, only once they've experienced these other coins and they've been burnt by these other coins, only then they realize the virtue of Bitcoin. It usually takes some time, maybe one cycle, for them to experience that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I was lucky when I was introduced to Bitcoin by my older brother. You know, he was made it very clear. It's like, do not bother with any of these other coins. Just stick with Bitcoin. And I'm very, very thankful that I didn't have to go through like that growing pain. Um, yeah, I think like like you said, the price action is what gets people into Bitcoin, but it's like you said, it's a distraction, and that's why like I don't know, for me as a Muslim, I mean, you know, there's this problem of riba, and you know the Quran and the Hadith talk so strongly about it, like more so than like you know other sins, like it's such a grave sin, and to me I think Bitcoin is the perfect solution to escape that riba problem. I mean, think about all the hoops you have to jump through when you're in any kind of like fiat investment, even if it's like an you know Islamic finance instrument, or like or
Yeah,
these Islamic banks. Like Bitcoin is a perfect foundation to build a monetary system that's free of riba. And I
yeah,
think like that's kind of the message that I'm trying to convey, instead of just like the price action is such a boring topic to me when it comes to Bitcoin. I think actually looking at Bitcoin's properties, and especially how it could like serve the Ummah, I think is something that's often overlooked. D- So I've been kind of investigating this idea of Bitcoin being like anti-riba money.
yeah.
Would you agree with that? And how would you like explain that property to a Muslim? Because a Muslim will just say, "Oh, well, you can just do an interest-based transaction on Bitcoin." So what are you talking about this it being anti-riba? How do you explain this anti-riba property to a Muslim if you believe in it?
Yeah. So um, when it comes to Bitcoin, like, let's look at Bitcoin next to gold. So Bitcoin has properties similar to gold, but it also has properties that is different to gold. Now, if you put next to those two, you put fiat. Fiat has properties that are similar to Bitcoin, but also has properties that are different from Bitcoin. Let's analyze um, some of those properties. So gold, one of the things about gold is that it's scarce, as we know. At the moment, who knows in the future? if mankind becomes a spacefaring being, maybe we could, mine Bitcoin cheaply in outer space in the future. But at the moment, right now, it's very scarce. So in that property itself, it allows and facilitates gold to be useful in the storing value. Because if gold was something that could be, materialized on demand, then that literally has no value. It has no means of recording value. Value is something is something which is scarce, as in the fact that I've made something means it wasn't there before, now it's there now. That is an element of scarcity. It's difficult to make, it's hard to make. Anything which is easy and freely available, we tend to not really value it. Only when it's scarce and rare, we tend to think, okay, I really want it now, because that's why people use it as a marketing ploy. They say, oh, only 5 spaces left, to try and add perceived value. It's a statement that we add to perceived value. Also, because gold is physical, that means that when I give it to you, I no longer have it. So you can say it's in its inherent physicality. It also allows the easy way and a correct way to record transactions without the need of a third party. As if, what I mean by that is, if I want to prove that I paid him, all I need to do is to prove that I no longer have it and he has it. If it was the case that I could give him something but also retain it myself, that kind of hinders the whole idea of transaction. The whole idea of me giving it to you means that I've now transferred it from my possession now to your possession. Because gold is physical, that is inherent within gold, which is, again, you find that in Bitcoin. So there are certain properties which allows gold to be an easy means of exchange or medium of exchange, which also is present within Bitcoin and in fiat. But there are things about gold which is a hindrance. Number one, it's heavy. So that weight kind of led to the use of paper as certificates back in the past. So it first began in China, where they first issued paper certificates to represent money stored somewhere else. Because paper is light, easily transferable, that gave paper an advantage over gold. Now, because paper isn't scarce like gold, I can easily make any number of paper easier than gold, that it wasn't able to be or to store value independently of gold. So that's why it came in tandem. You can almost say that paper money was the layer 2 of gold. A bit like we have now Bitcoin Lightning. So gold was the base layer where value was held, but paper became like the easier means, or you could say the layer 2 on top of gold, that allowed us to transfer the value of gold easily without the hassle of the weight and the carrying and all that kind of stuff. So we have properties that now Bitcoin has. Bitcoin is weightless. So I could transfer billions of dollars from USA to UK, and I don't have to worry about physical transportation. All I have to worry about is broadcasting a transaction. So there are properties within Bitcoin that are superior to gold. So, but with fiat has that property as well, technically speaking. If you look at how the banking system works and debt, they've used that kind of the debt system as a means of transfer. So as long as banks have, you could say, they have debt between themselves, I could transfer money from my account to your account, and now that liability and that kind of stuff, that's my means of quote unquote transferring value instantly or semi-instantly or whenever that kind of transaction happens. So the idea is that the fiat system runs and is built upon debt. So the only way I can transfer money from one place to another place without physically taking money is through debt liabilities. I mean, I owe you and you owe me and the rest of it, and blah, blah, blah. So the fiat system functions on debt. On top of that, the fiat system or the fiat money or currencies come into existence. They are issued through debt. As Saifuddin mentioned, the mining of currencies in the fiat system is through the issuance of riba, the issuance of loans. That's how you mine currency in the fiat system. Whereas in Bitcoin, you can't make Bitcoin come into existence through a loan. Bitcoin is Bitcoin. So why when someone says something like Riba can't occur on the Bitcoin network, or Bitcoin prevents riba. It's not entirely true, but it is true. Let me explain why. I can issue a Bitcoin or a interest-bearing loan using Bitcoin, but because Bitcoin is deflationary and ultimately scarce, it makes the prospect of doing such a loan distasteful or not appealing. It's not something which I mean, if I gave you one Bitcoin as a loan,
Mm-hmm.
and I said to you, I want you to pay me back 1.5 Bitcoin over a period of 5 years, you would say to me, no, I'm not doing that. But the issue is, why would you say no? Because you know that in 5 years' time, that one Bitcoin would have gone up probably 10 times. So
Mm-hmm.
because of that, you're not just paying 1.5 Bitcoin, you're paying a whole lot more, you could say, as part of your debt. So it disincentivizes or interest. It doesn't how can I say that's the way. It disincentivizes the issuance of interest-bearing loans. I mean, I'd be
Mm-hmm.
happy just to get the same Bitcoin back because I know that Bitcoin goes up in value. So to get back more of Bitcoin, on top of the fact that Bitcoin itself has gone up in value, that disincentivizes a person from issuing loans using Bitcoin. Also, the issue of issuance, because Bitcoin, or because if you look at banks, again, this comes down to the issue of how banks actually function. Banks can give you loans because they can issue fresh currency based on those loans. So if I go to a bank, imagine a bank has only £100 in the bank. So the banks have available to use only £100. And I want to take out a loan for £100. So I say, okay, here you go. Here's a loan for £100. Because they can issue you another fresh new £100 on top of the £100 they already have, they can do that. They can still be liquid. Whereas if Bitcoin, if they only had one Bitcoin to their name and they gave that to you as a loan, they can no longer give out any more loans. So the fact that Bitcoin is you can say hard money because you can't issue it on demand, that prevents the system of riba from functioning. If that makes sense. So there are
Mm-hmm.
many things about Bitcoin and its properties that prevents or disincentivizes anyone from issuing riba. It doesn't mean that you can't do a riba loan. I can easily say to you, brother, here's one Bitcoin, and I
Mm-hmm.
want back after a year 2 Bitcoin. I can say that to you, but no one would actually agree to that because of the properties, because Bitcoin is deflationary. Now, look at the current system of fiat, it's inflationary. One of the things that they actually do is, because of the issuance of new currency, they deflate the overall value of it, and that actually incentivizes the opposite. Meaning, if I was to give you a normal basic loan, if I was to say, look, here's £100, give me back £100 in a year's time, yeah, I know that in a year's time, that £100 is going to be worth less because of inflation. So it makes no sense for me to lend you £100 and get back £100. I am incentivized to get back more because otherwise I'm losing value. I'm actually harming myself to help you. So the whole system of fiat is actually based or incentivizes and encourages you to get back more or to give out or to engage in riba. And that's why I always say to people that there's no such thing as Islamic finance or Islamic mortgages, because no one in their right mind would give you a loan and get back the exact same value over the period of 30 years. No one would ever loan you £1 million or £500,000 or whatever the case may be to buy a house and then say to you, pay me back exactly £500,000 that I lent you in 30 years' time. Because they know that that £500,000 will be worth probably half or less than half of what it was the day they gave it to you. They're losing value by every day or every year that you have that loan. So they have to now say, look, I want a certain percentage. And that percentage increase has to at least beat inflation. So fiat encourages riba. It forces even riba. You can't exist. You can't even lend out money to someone without involving riba. You can't. Whereas Bitcoin, if I gave you one Bitcoin to buy a house, and I said to you, pay me back one Bitcoin in 30 years' time, I'll be happy to do that because that's the ultimate huddle. That's gaining value on its own, and he's giving me back exactly what I want. So I don't need to add interest. The fact that he just has the Bitcoin and gives me back the same one Bitcoin, I'm happy with that. I'm it's good. Do it. I don't mind. And just imagine for the sake of argument, he said to me, "Oh look, I can only give you back 0.9 Bitcoin. I'm bankrupt." I can accept that because it's still gone up 10x. I have lost Bitcoin. I have lost Sats, but it's not that bad a deal. Fiat, the nature of fiat and the nature of that, because fiat always loses value, it encourages you to always want more from your loans. But Bitcoin, because it always grows in value, there's no need to add interest or add more money to it. It actually is the opposite.
Yeah,
It disincentivizes Riba.
right, right. And I think another point is I remember reading in the fiat standard where Saifedean talked about like the huge downside for issuing loans on a Bitcoin standard because like you said, there's no bank that can just like print more Bitcoin in the case of default. Like if you ended up like
Yeah,
loaning like no one would want to loan their Bitcoin for the small upside of earning interest, but for the huge downside of losing your entire loan. Because if the person you loaned it out to goes bankrupt, there's no lender of last resort to print more Bitcoin. You just lost your Bitcoin. There's
yeah,
there's no getting it back.
yeah,
Um, yeah,
yeah,
and I
yeah.
I think that's often overlooked, and I think that's why I would say that Bitcoin has superior anti-riba properties compared to gold as well, because the issue with gold, like you said, is that it's heavy and it's hard to transport, and it always ends up in a central vault where a central entity like a bank can just issue credit over that gold. And
Mhm.
that now that's basically how fiat came into existence. So sure, gold does have some anti-river properties, but I think, like you said, Bitcoin, I think is the best money we've had in terms of being anti-riba. Yeah, that's actually a very good way to explain it. Thank you.
Ironically, and this is quite sad, one of the reasons I believe why we've come to this current system of riba was actually as a result of gold. I know that people might think I'm demonizing gold. No, I'm not demonizing gold, but I'm just saying that the current riba system we have was a property that was necessary to deal with um the interactions or the global interactions that the world needed. As in, we needed some way to transact cross border, across long distances, with shorter time span, without the need of transporting gold. So the failings of gold led human beings to make other systems that were superior, that were more faster, that was lighter, and that was at the time liabilities through loans. It's just that Bitcoin allows you to have the properties of gold, because it's digital, it's instant. So it
Hmm.
removes the need for liabilities. So you can almost say it's a transition. So you kind of needed, probably the best way to look at it is like vinegar. So first we have grape juice, and grape juice is nice and great, tastes nice. But then if you left your grape juice out in the sun, or whatever, however you do it, that grape juice can turn to alcohol, which is haram. But if you continue doing, I don't know how you do it, but if you continue doing something else, that alcohol will turn to vinegar. That's the last stage, which is also useful. So similarly, we can say that gold was useful, no doubt. But there was a stage where we needed something else, or it morphed, or money morphed to something else, which was harmful, which is our current system, which was
Hmm.
at the time. It was there at the time, but now we've gone to vinegar. Now we've gone to another system, which was, you could say, Bitcoin, which we no longer need this previous system. You can almost say it was a transitory stage from one stage to the other. We needed faster payments. We needed another way of doing things, and we use credit as that faster means of payment, that faster payment. But now we have Bitcoin. There's no need for the credit system. We can have immediate system, and this is one of the reasons why um, those who say we need to return back to the gold standard, what they're essentially saying is that we need to remove all the benefits that we have accrued over time, and go backwards. I always say to people, how would I transact with someone from Saudi Arabia in gold. I'm in the UK, you're in Saudi Arabia. How do I buy goods and services from you using gold? Oh, brother, what you can do is you can put gold in a vault and you can have a certificate and you can transfer. But, brother, that's the same thing we have already. You now
Hmm.
introduce counterparty risk and you now introduce liabilities, which is what we already have. What we need is something which has value in and of itself on a digital system. Gold, gold has problems. And we went to credit to resolve those problems. And every gold bug today, though everyone says we need to return back to the gold standard, all they're really saying is we need to go back to the system that would lead to credit. There's no way for me to transact realistically on a day-to-day basis with gold unless we introduce credit into the system,
Hmm.
liabilities into the system, loans into the system. That's the only way. There's no way you can really use gold unless at some point loans, credit, and all kind of things exist. Even if you look at the Islamic means of exchange, which is hawala. One guy is in Medina. He wants to transfer money to Mecca. He doesn't want to walk it to Mecca to take the money there. So he gives money to some guy in Medina. He sends a message to his friend, his counterpart in Mecca, give him the money. That's called hawala. But hawala only works through counterparty risk. You need that middleman to do that. And that's inherent within gold. Bitcoin itself, you're actually transferring a bearer asset from one person to the other digitally as fast as a message can be sent, like an email. You're doing that via Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is a next step. It is where things will go. It just takes time for people to accept that principle. Really, just conclude the issue of riba. I do believe that Bitcoin it has inherent properties that would make liabilities and riba not make sense. It just doesn't make sense. Why would I go back to using coins? Think about it this way. Why would I go back to using coins to transact when I can use my debit card? I just swipe my card. I mean, we can put your debit card on your phone now. You just double tap your phone, and that's it. You got Apple Pay or Google Pay. Why would you go back to carrying coins in your pocket when you can just carry your phone? It's the same thing.
Hmm.
The same thing.
Yeah, I think that was a really good point talking about gold because, like you said, you always need that counterparty risk if you're going to actually like transact with that gold, especially at like a, global scale.
Russia, for example, they had 2/3 of their assets frozen after they invaded Ukraine, and the only thing that they couldn't freeze was what they had on Russian soil, primarily their gold bullion that they have been buying for years and
Hmm.
storing in Russia. So that's one of the benefits of gold is that unless someone can actually physically get to your gold, they can't take it. They can't just seize it off you. That's a benefit. But can Russia transact internationally with that gold? They have it. It's sitting in their vaults. But if they
Hmm.
wanted to literally buy something right now from Venezuela or whatnot, how do they get that gold from Russia to Venezuela? They have to do it by ship. They have to put it on some kind of cargo ship, run the risk of someone attacking the ship or the ship sinking. It costs so much money. I mean, imagine they want to send $1 billion worth of gold from Russia to Venezuela for some kind of transaction. Do you know how much money they have to spend? Just finalize that transaction. It's not feasible. Whereas if they had $1 million of Bitcoin, it's literally a transaction. That's it. Just all they have to do is phone up the president of Venezuela. Say, give me a Bitcoin address. That's it. So why would you go back to gold when it has so many inherent problems?
Yeah, addressing that other point, of like a Muslim saying, "Oh, well, you can just Bitcoin doesn't have any anti-riba properties because you can do a riba transaction." But the thing is that the difference between that and fiat is that whenever a riba transaction is done in fiat, it affects everybody. Like you can't escape that riba transaction because literally the foundation of fiat is just debt or treasuries that are tied to interest. But now
Yeah,
Alice and Bob do a transaction on the Bitcoin network and they decide that they're gonna like do a Riba transaction while eating pork or whatever. Like it doesn't matter. That happens in a closed system. It doesn't affect any of the holders of Bitcoin. And I think that's like a key difference in, I guess, like defining that anti-Riba property.
Yeah. So
Um,
let me expand
yeah.
upon that one. Let me
Uh-huh.
expand upon that point there. So one of the difference, just for those that probably didn't get it, one of the main differences in how Riba is issued on the fiat standard and how Riba could be issued on the Bitcoin standard is that when a bank gives out a Riba loan, they actually create new currency. They issue new currency into existence to fulfill that transaction. That has a dilutionary property in the economy. You're actually increasing the money supply in the currency. So that's why we have this bubble, or many bubbles in the markets, especially like the housing bubble. Why are house prices going up? Because there's so much credit already issued, increasing the money supply and therefore increasing the value of or the perceived value of houses. Because, for example, if in a village, for example, there was only £100 to spend, that means people can only really spend £100, and therefore everything will be valued in relation to that £100. But if every time I want to buy a house, I can issue loans and therefore increase the money supply, that increases the perceived value of the houses because there's more money in circulation. As opposed to Bitcoin, if I gave a Bitcoin loan, I am going to give you the actual Bitcoin. Because Bitcoin is so easy, I don't need to store my Bitcoin in a bank account like I do with fiat and that kind of stuff. Therefore, if I do give you a Bitcoin loan, that means Bitcoin has to come from somewhere else. So you're not actually increasing the money supply of Bitcoin. The most you're doing is you're increasing the velocity. So you're increasing the circulation of Bitcoin that already exists, but you're not increasing the base number of Bitcoins that are in circulation. Whereas in fiat, you are, whenever every time you issue a loan, you are actually increasing the actual number of money or units of money that's in circulation. So the issuance of loans in the fiat system is inflationary, whereas the issuance of Bitcoin loans, if you say that the Riba loans, is not inflationary. You're not increasing the number of Bitcoin. And when you
Mm-hmm.
pay that Bitcoin money back, imagine you want to pay that interest back from Riba on your Bitcoin, you have to somehow find additional Bitcoin to pay it back. So you have to go and work and do whatever you need to do. Whereas in the fiat standard or fiat method, the money when you issue new credit, that essentially the bank has now issued a liability on their books and an asset on your books. So you have to if everyone wants to try and pay back all the loans on the fiat standard, you would run out of money before you then be able to pay back all the loans. Whereas that system couldn't actually exist or couldn't actually function on the Bitcoin standard because you can't actually increase the money supply through Bitcoin or through loans. That makes sense.
Yeah.
There is an inherent difference between issuing a Bitcoin loan on a Riba loan on Bitcoin and a Riba loan on fiat. You don't actually increase the money supply in doing so. But go on.
Thank you. That was a great addition in that, yeah, like when you're issuing a loan in fiat, you increase the actual number of the actual money. And for Bitcoin, you don't actually increase that amount. That's not how Bitcoin is mined. Bitcoin is mined through proof of work.
Yeah,
And I think I think that the proof of work is actually another property that makes it anti-Riba because it makes it hard to produce more. Like compared to
yeah,
another,
yeah,
like proof of stake, I think that would, there's not actual any work put into making it. It's just kind of like a staking mechanism that governs that. And I think, actually to have like an anti-Riba money, it needs to have proof of work, in my opinion.
we need to recognize that these two concepts, proof of work and proof of stake, are actually synonymous to the old system of gold versus fiat. Gold cannot come into existence unless you actually go and physically make it. So you need to actually put work into it to make it come into existence. This is the similarity between gold and Bitcoin. Whereas fiat is through interest, through having money and earning more money as a result of having money. So proof of
Hmm.
stake resembles the fiat system, whereas proof of work resembles the gold system. So any
Hmm.
Muslim who wants ethical currency or wants a currency to resemble Islamic values, proof of stake currencies wouldn't be that that currency. You wouldn't say that proof of stake currencies resemble Islamic ethics. They actually, if anything, they resemble fiat ethics, Riba ethics. They don't resemble Islamic ethics. Only Bitcoin, or you could say only proof of stake, proof of work currencies resemble Islamic ethics, i.e., those who work for it deserve
Hmm.
it. And I want to touch upon one. I want to make a rebuttal of one person who is very, very venomous and anti-Bitcoin. He
Hmm.
actually mentioned one of his arguments against Bitcoin, which was he said that the currencies should be issued by governments. Currencies, when you issue them, they should be issued by governments, and they should decide where the money goes. And I laugh because what currencies, the value should be given to those who earned it, not those who have been given it. If I was to say to you, someone wants to create £1,000,000. If I was to say to you, who deserves that £1,000,000? The easiest answer we could say, the one who earned it deserves it. That's how you decide. That's how one could decide who has more right to anything.
Hmm.
It's like anything. Any child, when they do something, they say, "This is mine." Why is it mine? Oh, because I made it. Yeah, any child will understand that if they made something, they have the right to own it because they've earned it. Now, if I said to them, and if I was to take a very communist way of saying, no, 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 although you made it, I want to take it from you and give it to someone else who had nothing to do with it, put no effort into making it, I want to give it to them anyway. You would say that's unfair. Why does this guy have the right over something he had no hand in paying to take it? And this is the issue of government issuance comes into play. Why does the government have the right to decide who has the money, who doesn't? These are the questions people need to be asking themselves when assessing the fiat system. Why do central banks have the right to issue currency? What gave them that right? How did they earn that? This is one of the issues one of the things why I fell in love with Bitcoin, because only those who put the effort to secure the system deserve to be rewarded for that effort. This is
Hmm.
the purest and most fairest way to issue currencies. So, same thing with gold. If I said to someone, why does this person deserve? Why does this guy who mined gold from a mountain? Why does he deserve to have it? Because he put effort into it. He went to the mountain, took time out of his life. He bought a pickaxe. He prospected and found and he earned it. That's his proof that he deserves it. So
Hmm.
proof of stake is basically saying, because you're rich, you deserve to be even more rich. That's the basic premise of proof of stake. And ironically, if you look at how Ethereum, for example, came about from the very beginning, it was all
Hmm.
about making money. It was not about saving the world or changing the system or anything like that. It was all about, if you look at how Vitalik Buterin, when he had the first discussion about the pre-mine, it was all about making money. And this is basically what we're trying to escape with the Bitcoin standard. We're trying to escape this rent-seeking mindset and go to a more pure form, a more fairer system. If that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, and I think like that's why personally I believe that proof of work is it's kind of the fairest way to actually figure out who gets to get like new coins or new money, because they actually have to put work into it, as opposed to like proof of stake where you're just like staking some coins and you're not putting any work. That's not to say that like proof of stake is like haram, but like you said, from a ethical perspective, it's definitely more proof of work to me is more ethical than proof of stake, in that aspect. Um, yeah, I guess the only last question I had is for your videos that you uploaded where you kind of counter all of the claims made by scholars. What made you decide to like do that video series? It's more of a personal question, but like, was there like a point that you were like, all right, I'm gonna do this and put out these videos because I'm tired of hearing all of this?
Um, yeah, well, that was literally it, really, because from 2017 onwards, I decided to dive down a rabbit hole of Bitcoin, and I want to understand how does it work, what's the mechanism behind it, and because I have a background in computing and programming,
Hmm.
I really wanted to understand the basics uh, and dive really deep into the mechanisms behind it. And over the years, 2017, 18, 19, I've had lots of discussions with people, debates with people. I've even sat down with some scholars to try and explain to them. And I just found myself repeating the same thing over and over again. And I thought to myself, if I made a series that I can always point someone to, I think that would make it easier to disseminate the knowledge. So therefore, I don't have to keep on debating and arguing and getting frustrated. I think if I could make a series, that should suffice and getting the knowledge out there. And I try to do as professional as I can, as everyone would want to do.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the main motivation. And I was hoping that maybe some scholars might come across this material and it would help educate them as to how it functions, how it works. Because I do believe in the future, some point in the future, we will get there where people, where Bitcoin won't be so this strange thing anymore and we don't know what it means. It'll become something that we all know. Everyone knows how Bitcoin works. Everyone knows there'll be only 21 million. Everyone knows that there's miners, what they do, what nodes do. Everyone will know these things and how it functions, and addresses, and everyone will know. And it will no longer be this enigma, this thing that people don't get, and it's strange and weird. Everyone would know it. And one of the reasons why they would know it is because the governments across the world are trying to scramble to try and make their own CBDC. So they're already trying to copy Bitcoin already. So because of that, people are going to be forced to learn how this function, how the system works. And this is why I think that these CBDCs would actually push people to even push people towards Bitcoin even more. Because then the question would be, why would I use a CBDC instead of Bitcoin? If they both do the same function of transferring money digitally, why would I use this thing that's inflating at 2, 3, 4, 5% a year, as opposed to this thing which is limited and is not controlled by any central bank, can't be printed out of thin air? I mean, why would I do that? The only reason why people would use it is due to government mandate, and that's one of the advantages of fiat power of Bitcoin, and that's violence. Governments can promise you that they will hurt you if you don't use their currency. Whereas Bitcoin is something people use if they want to, and that's one of the benefits of Bitcoin. If you think about it, that Bitcoin allows you, Bitcoin treats you like a human being. If you want to use it, use it. If you don't want to use it, don't use it. It's perfectly fine. No one's gonna kill you for it. You do you. Whereas a fiat, because it's such a fragile system, they basically say use it or I'll hurt you. And that kind of demonstrates really the strength of Bitcoin and the virtue of Bitcoin. That Bitcoin wins without having to fight. Whereas fiat only wins through violence. There's no other way.
That's the beauty of Bitcoin, is that it's completely voluntary. No one is forcing you to use it like fiat, where you're forced to take part in that system in whatever jurisdiction that you're in.
And the thing is, that's what you find as well across the world. That's what you find, is that when people are given the choice, and they're given the knowledge, the understanding of both systems, people will naturally gravitate towards Bitcoin. It's just something that you'd find across the board. They might not be as evangelical as us, but generally speaking, if people have the ability, so I mean, the way to put it or present it would be, if someone has the ability to earn Bitcoin and spend it easily, then they will naturally use it anyway. The only reason why the adoption is so slow at the moment is because it's not easy to spend. That's why I always tell people, please try and get yourself one of those crypto debit cards. If you get yourself a crypto debit card where you can spend your Bitcoin at any shop, I guarantee you will not want to use fiat. Because why would I? What benefit do I have? I can use something which is even better than fiat. I can use Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly. Once we can once Bitcoin is accepted everywhere, there's not going to be any need for fiat, and that will, I don't know, that will probably start the death of fiat systems. Hopefully, inshallah.
Hopefully, inshallah.
Those are pretty much all the questions I have. I guess before I let you go, where can people find you?
So I mean, I'm kind of semi-active on Twitter, so I do have a Twitter account, but I guess mainly I have a website called cryptohashreview.com, which is kind of ironic because that was the reason why I chose that name. That initially I had an idea that I was going to make a website where I can analyze and discuss which cryptocurrencies were halal, and the reviews of them. As you know, when you start learning about all these things, you realize at the end of the day, all of them are useless other than Bitcoin. So it was a name that came about with the righteous intention, which ended up being a bit of a pointless one. So, that's the and on that I have made plenty of videos covering the topic of Bitcoin, um, and also have a YouTube channel as well. So that's kind of the place you get me. But if you want to one stop shop, this is the website cryptoattribute.com that has pretty much all the information about how to contact me.
Awesome. Thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
All right.